My wife demanded my medical savings. When I refused, her lover smashed my head into a wall. Then she panicked when everything changed. 3 weeks before my wife asked me for $60,000, I looked up a divorce attorney. I don't know why. Nothing had happened yet, no confrontation, no demand, no Roland. Just a quiet restless night and something in my gut whispering in a language I wasn't ready to translate. I saved the contact. Told myself I was being paranoid. Closed the laptop and went to bed next to my wife of 9 years and said nothing. 3 weeks later I was on the floor of my own home office with blood on my fingers and my wife standing over me calculating something that had nothing to do with whether I was okay. And the only reason I still have every dollar of that $62,000 today, the only reason, is that I said no on a Sunday morning and held that answer through 4 days of pressure, a coordinated campaign, and a man willing to use his hands to change my mind. I sent that attorney's email from the ER at 11:47 p.m. Best decision I ever made. Stay with me, and I'll tell you exactly what she panicked about when everything changed. Viewers, before we continue, please subscribe, like and share. My name is Cabe Musk. I'm a 43-year-old biomedical equipment technician working out of Nashville, Tennessee, and if you've never heard of my line of work, that's exactly the point. I service MRI machines, dialysis units, and surgical robots for 3 hospital systems across the metro area. Most people don't know jobs like mine exist until something breaks at 2 in the morning and someone's life depends on it being fixed. In 11 years, I have never missed a call. Not once. I tell you that not to brag, but because you need to understand what kind of man I am before you understand what was done to me. I grew up in Clarksville, 45 minutes north of Nashville, the oldest of 3 boys raised by a father who worked double shifts at a paper mill and still died broke. When he had his cardiac event in 2019, the hospital bills arrived before the condolence cards. I watched my mother open envelopes at the kitchen table with the same hands she'd used to fold his work shirts for 30 years. That image never left me. I swore, standing at his graveside in the January cold, that I would never leave anyone I loved in that position. So I saved. Every month, without fail, I moved money into a medical fund that I built like a wall against the worst possible day. Her name was Paige Cabe. My wife of 9 years. She used to say I was the most reliable man she'd ever met, and she said it the way you'd compliment a well-made appliance, with appreciation, but without hunger. I should have heard the distance in that. I didn't. I was too busy being reliable. Too busy maintaining the life we'd built together to notice that somewhere along the way, she had stopped building it with me. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how I almost lost everything. And how one terrible Friday night forced me to finally see the truth I had been living inside without knowing it. It started on a Sunday morning in February, the kind of gray Nashville morning where the cold presses against the windows like it wants inside. I was at the stove frying eggs, coffee already poured, still in the comfortable silence I'd built around weekend mornings the way some men build sheds, carefully, deliberately, because it was the one part of the week that felt entirely mine. Paige walked in and I heard her before I saw her. Heels on hardwood. That sound on a Sunday meant something was already wrong. She was fully dressed. Blazer, makeup, the whole architecture of a woman prepared for a performance. She set her purse on the counter without looking at me and said it the way you'd read a grocery list, flat, rehearsed, already decided. She said she needed me to move $60,000 from my medical savings into a joint account by Friday. I turned the burner off. That fund held $62,400. For years of disciplined, monthly transfers into an account I had structured specifically after watching my mother open hospital bills at the kitchen table the winter my father died. I had told Paige that story. She had held my hand when I told it. She knew exactly what that money represented, not just financially, but in the bone-deep, grief-built way that some decisions are less about money than about promises you make to the dead. I asked her what it was for. She said it was a business investment. A friend was launching something, they needed seed capital, the window was closing fast. She delivered all of it without a single pause, which is how I knew the answer had been prepared long before the question was asked. I told her no. Calmly. I said I would look at documentation, review real numbers, have a proper conversation, but I would not move my medical savings on a 4-day deadline with no paperwork. She stared at me for a long moment with an expression I hadn't seen before. Then she picked up her purse and walked out without another word. The eggs went cold. I stood at the stove alone and felt the first thin crack run through something I hadn't known was fragile. The next 4 days were unlike anything in 9 years of marriage. Paige didn't argue, she campaigned. There's a difference. Arguing is 2 people in a room trying to reach each other. Campaigning is one person executing a strategy they designed before the conversation started. She texted me at work between service calls. She called during my lunch break with a softness in her voice that felt borrowed from somewhere. She raised it at dinner with the patient, measured persistence of someone running out of time rather than someone making a reasonable request. By Tuesday night, the softness was gone. She told me I was selfish. That I valued a savings account more than our future. That she had sacrificed opportunities to support my career and now, when she needed me to show faith in her, I was hiding behind fear. It was a masterful reframe. Suddenly my caution was a character flaw, and her urgency was proof of her belief in us. I had watched her do this in arguments before, redirect the gravity of a situation until you forgot what you were originally standing on. I had always admired it. Sitting across the dinner table that Tuesday, admiration was not what I felt. Wednesday, her mother called me. Then Sasha, a college friend of Paige's I had met perhaps 3 times in 9 years, called within the hour. Both said nearly the same thing, almost word for word, about support and trust and what a good husband does. The coordination was so transparent it was almost insulting. But what settled in my chest wasn't anger. It was something colder and quieter, the recognition that this had been organized. That I was being worked. Thursday night I told her my answer was still no. She went quiet, not hurt quiet, but strategic quiet. The kind of silence that means someone is changing lanes. I lay beside her that night in the dark listening to her breathe and tried to remember when the woman next to me had started feeling like someone I needed to be careful around. I couldn't find the moment. Which meant it had been gradual. Which was worse. Friday came, and so did someone I had never seen before. I was in my home office reviewing calibration logs for a portable imaging unit when Paige appeared in the doorway. She said she wanted to talk. Her voice had a new quality, not soft, not hard, but staged, like a curtain being drawn back. Then a man stepped into the frame behind her and stood in my doorway with the posture of someone who had decided, before entering, that the room already belonged to him. He was mid-30s, broad through the shoulders, with the groomed, unhurried look of a man who had learned that confidence worn correctly can substitute for almost anything else. Paige introduced him as a colleague. His name was Roland. He didn't offer his hand. He looked around my office the way a buyer looks at a property, appraising, already calculating what he'd change. Later I would learn the full shape of Roland Fitch. He was a private real estate investor out of Brentwood with a trail of dissolved LLCs, a dismissed complaint from a woman in Franklin, and a talent so refined it bordered on craft, the ability to identify women with access to other people's money and position himself as the opportunity they'd been waiting for. He had been inside Paige's life for at least 8 months before he stood in my doorway. The business she wanted my $60,000 for was his project. A short-term rental portfolio in Chattanooga he was assembling with capital from multiple women, at least 2 of whom believed they had a unique arrangement with him. He spoke first. He said the opportunity had a hard closing date and my hesitation was going to cost Paige a significant return. He said it with boardroom fluency, like I was the irrational variable in a room where I was being ambushed in my own home. I stood up from my desk. I told him clearly he needed to leave. He stepped forward, grabbed the front of my shirt, and drove me into the wall. My head hit the corner of a mounted shelf. I went down hard. I heard the shelf rattle, heard Paige's voice go high and strange, "Roland, stop," and then I was on the floor of my own office with blood on my fingers and my wife's face above me. What I saw in her expression wasn't horror. It was panic. Calculation. Fear, not for me. For herself. That was the moment I understood everything. Paige drove me to Vanderbilt University Medical Center without speaking. Not one word the entire ride. I sat in the passenger seat pressing a dish towel to the back of my skull and watched Nashville move past the window like scenery from someone else's life, the lit storefronts, the bridge over the Cumberland, the hospital sign appearing out of the dark like something I had been moving toward for longer than just tonight. The ER doctor was a young woman named Dr. Olcott. She cleaned and closed the laceration with the efficient gentleness of someone trained to treat the wound without frightening the patient into silence. She asked me twice, in different ways, how I had sustained the injury. I told her I'd hit a shelf. She wrote it down with the practiced neutrality of someone who hears that answer often and understands exactly what it sometimes conceals. While I waited for the CT results, something shifted in me, a quiet, load-bearing shift, like a beam finding its true position. I took out my phone and began documenting. Photographs of the wound. A time-stamped note, Roland Fitch, the date, the sequence of events, Paige's expression when I hit the floor. I emailed it to myself. Then I stepped into the hallway and called my brother Troy in Memphis and told him everything in a low, even voice while Paige sat 30 feet away in the waiting room staring at her phone. 6 years earlier, I had sat in that same ER beside Paige for 4 hours after she broke her wrist at a friend's house. I had held her hand through the imaging, driven her home, made soup, slept lightly in case she needed something in the night. I thought about that version of myself standing in the hallway. I thought about how completely and invisibly a life can turn. Troy said 3 words. Don't go home. The CT came back clean, mild concussion, no fracture. As Dr. Olcott walked me through discharge, she slipped a small card into my papers without comment. A domestic violence resource number. She didn't explain it. She simply looked at me with the steady, knowing eyes of someone who had learned that the most important thing she could do sometimes was place something quietly in someone's hand and trust them to use it. I pocketed the card. And I made a decision. In the ER parking lot I told Paige I needed air and I'd meet her at home. She nodded too quickly, the nod of someone relieved that a scene was being avoided, not someone concerned about her husband's head wound. I watched her taillights disappear into the Nashville dark. Then I called a rideshare, rode to a Marriott on West End Avenue, and checked in with my personal card under my own name like a man with a plan, which I suppose by then I was. The hotel room was generic and clean and anonymous, and I sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on for a long time. The concussion made the overhead light feel sharp, but my thinking was unusually clear, the terrible, stripped clarity that arrives when the noise finally stops and you stop helping it start again. I called Troy. He had already been looking. Roland Fitch had a civil judgment filed against him in Williamson County, an unpaid contractor. There was the dismissed complaint from Franklin. His name appeared across 3 LLCs registered in the past 2 years, each one listing a different woman as co-owner or registered agent. Troy paused when he got to the last one. Then he said it slowly, like he was giving me time to brace. One of Roland's LLCs, RT Capital Holdings, listed Paige Cabe as a registered agent. The filing date was 7 months ago. My wife had been legally bound to this man's financial operation for 7 months while sleeping next to me. 7 months of good mornings and dinner conversations and a life I thought I was living inside. 3 weeks before any of this, on a restless night I hadn't been able to explain to myself, I had looked up a family law attorney through my hospital's employee assistance program. I had saved the contact and told myself I was being paranoid. I opened my email now and found the name. Renata Voss. I composed a message in that quiet hotel room at 11:47 p.m., attached my time-stamped documentation, and hit send. Then I lay back on the pillow and stared at the ceiling until the Nashville dark began going gray at the edges and morning came whether I was ready for it or not. Renata Voss responded at 6 in the morning. We met at 7:30. Her office was clean and quietly expensive, tall windows, morning light, the kind of room designed to make people feel that order was still possible. She was in her 50s, composed in the way that comes not from distance but from having sat across from enough devastation to stop being rattled by it. She took notes by hand. I noted that too. I laid out everything without editorializing. The demand. The 4-day deadline. The coordinated calls from Paige's mother and Sasha. Roland's appearance in my home. The assault. The hospital documentation and photographs. The time-stamped notes I'd emailed to myself from the ER hallway. The LLC filing with Paige's name. Everything Troy had found. I placed my phone on her desk and walked her through it in sequence, the way I'd walk a hospital technician through a malfunction, methodically, completely, without skipping steps. Renata listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment that felt considered rather than empty. Then she said I had already done most of what she would have advised. Now she would tell me what came next. She had handled 14 divorce cases involving financial fraud in the past 3 years alone. She had a particular fluency with what she called affinity fraud within the marital context, the use of intimacy and trust as delivery mechanisms for economic coercion. She recognized the structure of what I described immediately. She had seen it before, she said. Usually the victim was a woman. Not always. She outlined my position with precision. The assault created grounds for a police report, not for vengeance, but because documentation builds timelines and timelines create leverage. The LLC filing represented potential marital asset concealment, which in Tennessee's equitable distribution framework could shift the settlement calculus significantly. My medical fund, given its structure and documented purpose, had strong grounds to be ruled separate property entirely. Then she asked me one question. Before this week, did I have records of my financial contributions to this marriage, income, savings, account history? 11 years of pay stubs. Every account statement. Every tax return. All of it. For the first time, something close to satisfaction crossed her face. Good, she said. Then we have a foundation. I filed the report Saturday afternoon at a Metro Nashville precinct that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. The detective assigned to take my statement was a methodical man named Officer Strand who asked clear questions and wrote down the answers without editorial. He examined my documentation, photographed the injury records, and explained the process in plain language. Assault causing bodily harm. Roland Fitch's name entered into a system that does not forget names easily once they arrive. I did not contact Paige. I stayed in the hotel. And I want to tell you something about that weekend that might surprise you. I worked. 2 hospitals needed remote equipment support on Saturday, and I handled both from my hotel room with my laptop and a phone headset, the same way I always had, because 3 hospital systems do not pause for personal crisis and neither, in 11 years, had I. There is a kind of dignity in that continuity. I held on to it deliberately, the way you hold a railing on a staircase you can't yet see the bottom of. Sunday morning, Paige called. I let it reach voicemail. Her message was short and surgically careful, no anger, no real apology, just measured softness. She hoped I was okay. Things had gotten out of hand. She thought we needed to talk. Roland's name did not appear in the message even once. He had been edited out completely, like a figure removed from a photograph, the background adjusted so carefully you'd never know anything had been cut. Monday at 9:14 a.m., Renata's office filed for divorce and issued formal legal notice. Paige received service at the house. She called me 11 times in the 2 hours that followed. I answered on the 12th. She was crying, genuinely, I believed, though by then I had lost the ability to be certain what was real and what was deployed. She said Roland had manipulated her. She said she loved me. She said she had made a terrible mistake. I told her I believed she believed that. Then I said my attorney would be in touch and I ended the call. The silence afterward was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. The discovery process took 6 weeks. What emerged was not one betrayal but a layered architecture of smaller decisions, each one defensible in isolation, each one pointing in the same direction when you finally laid them end to end on a conference room table and looked at what they spelled. Paige had opened a personal account, undisclosed, not joint, 14 months prior. Into it she had moved $11,000 over time, transferred in amounts small enough to avoid automatic bank flagging. The source was her own salary, which she earned legitimately, but the concealment of the account within our marriage, combined with its documented purpose, created a legal exposure she clearly had not anticipated when she designed the arrangement. 5 months before Roland stood in my doorway, $8,000 had wired from Paige's hidden account into RT Capital Holdings. Roland had used a portion of those funds to cover an overdue filing fee on a separate property, a property tied to a different woman, in a different arrangement, in Atlanta. Paige's $8,000 had effectively subsidized another woman's situation without either of them knowing the other existed. She had risked our stability for a man who was managing parallel schemes with the administrative efficiency of someone running a small business. I sat in Renata's conference room and looked at the document spread across that table and felt something that wasn't anger and wasn't satisfaction. It was closer to sorrow, the particular sorrow of understanding, completely and too late, the true shape of something you had lived inside without ever seeing clearly. Renata presented Roland's civil exposure to his attorney with quiet directness. A coordinated multi-party filing was possible. He did not contest. He signed a statement confirming the assault had occurred, characterizing it as a regrettable loss of judgment. That statement entered my civil record and stayed there. My medical fund had not been touched. $62,400, exactly as I had left it. Because on a gray Sunday morning in February, standing at a cold stove, I had said no. That single word, held quietly against every pressure applied to dislodge it, had been the difference between everything and nothing. The divorce was finalized 4 months after I filed. Renata navigated the equitable distribution process with the same quiet precision she brought to everything, presenting documentation, establishing timelines, letting the record speak in the measured, irrefutable language that courts respond to better than emotion. The medical fund was ruled separate property in its entirety, given its structure, its history, and the clear documentary evidence of its purpose. The marital equity in the house was split. Paige was assigned a settlement debt to me of $9,000, representing her share of the funds she had moved into Roland's operation from accounts with marital ties. She agreed without extended litigation. I think she was exhausted. I think, underneath the exhaustion, she was ashamed, not of being caught, but of what being caught required her to see about herself. I don't say that with cruelty. I say it because I spent a lot of time in those months trying to understand her honestly, the way you owe someone after 9 years even when the 9 years ended the way ours did. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in East Nashville in June. Simple, clean, spare. I kept my job. I kept my Sunday calls with Troy. I started seeing a therapist, a man named Dr. Holloway who had an extraordinary patience for long silences and a talent for asking one question that made the entire week's noise suddenly locate itself. He never pushed. He just waited until I was ready to find the thing I had been circling. My father's fund sat intact, all $62,000, and I added to it the following month the same as always. There is something I cannot fully explain about doing that, sitting at my laptop on the first of the month, making that transfer. It felt like keeping a promise. Not to myself. To him. To the man who worked double shifts at a paper mill and still died broke, whose ghost I have been quietly answering to ever since I stood at his graveside in the January cold and decided who I was going to be. I kept the decision. Even when someone tried very hard to take it from me. Here is what I know now that I did not know before. Reliability is not the same as visibility. I was so dependable, so structurally present in the architecture of our life together, that I had become easy to plan around, easy to pressure, easy to underestimate, easy to treat as a fixed wall you could eventually move if you found the right leverage and applied it long enough. I am certain that when Paige described me to Roland, the word she used was predictable. I am certain he heard that word and felt the particular confidence of a man who has learned that predictable people have predictable limits. He was almost right. Almost. What neither of them calculated was that the reliability they were trying to exploit was not softness. It was not passivity or fear wearing the costume of steadiness. It was something built deliberately, brick by brick, in honor of a father who died without a safety net and a promise I made at his grave. That kind of foundation does not shift because someone wants it to. It holds precisely because it was built for the moments when everything is pressing against it. Dr. Holloway asked me, 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, what I had learned. I sat with it for a long time before I answered. I told him that the most dangerous lies are the ones you tell yourself about the people you love. That love is not the same as safety. That care and manipulation can live inside the same person simultaneously for years, and neither one cancels the other out, they just take turns. He nodded and asked what I would do differently. I said I would trust the feeling I already have, sooner. I would stop explaining it away. Stop building reasonable stories around unreasonable things because the alternative was harder to sit with. He wrote something down. I didn't ask what. Roland Fitch, last I heard through Troy, is the subject of a civil suit in Fulton County, Georgia. The woman in Atlanta finally filed. There may be others. And Paige? She moved to Knoxville. I hope she's okay. 9 years leaves a residue, even when it ends like this. Especially when it ends like this. I'm telling you this story because somewhere out there, someone is standing at a stove watching their eggs go cold and already knows something they haven't let themselves say yet. That feeling isn't paranoia. That feeling is information. Trust it. Stay with me, because what Dr. Holloway uncovered next, through a routine referral process, connected a name I hadn't expected to Roland Fitch's case file. And it changes everything I thought I knew about how this story actually started.